The chapel smelled like lilies and lies. I stood 3 feet from the coffin, watching Daniel's mother sob into a lace handkerchief while his sister Rachel clutched her arm. The mourners filled every pew, their faces arranged in practiced grief. Someone had placed my photograph beside the casket, the one from our engagement party, where I wore that cream dress and smiled like I believed in forever. She loved him so much, someone whispered behind me. Poor Olivia, she looks destroyed. I wasn't destroyed. I was awake. The microphone crackled as the priest called for anyone who wished to speak. Rachel rose first, her black dress perfectly tailored, her tears perfectly timed. She walked to the podium with the grace of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. My brother was the kindest man I ever knew, she began, her voice breaking at exactly the right moment. He gave everything to the people he loved, especially to Olivia. The words hung in the air like smoke. I felt every eye turn toward me, expecting me to crumble, to collapse, to perform the grief of a devastated fiancé. Instead, I remained still, my hands folded in my lap, my expression composed, because I knew something they didn't. I knew that 3 days ago I had died. It started 6 months before the funeral, though the roots went deeper, buried in years I'd spent loving someone who saw me as convenient rather than cherished. Daniel and I met in college. He was pre-med ambitious, always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. I was studying literature, dreaming of becoming a writer, filling notebooks with stories I never showed anyone. He found me in the library one October evening, asked to borrow my notes from Biology 101, and somehow that simple exchange became coffee, became dinners, became a relationship that consumed 4 years of my life. You ground me, he used to say, running his fingers through my hair. Everyone else wants something from me. You just want me. I believed him. After graduation, I followed him to his hometown when he got into medical school. I took a job at a small publishing house, editorial assistant work that paid barely enough for my half of rent. Daniel studied constantly. I brought him a coffee at midnight, proofread his papers, cancelled plans so he wouldn't feel guilty about studying. His mother, Patricia, would visit and make small comments about my hobby job and ask when I planned to do something more substantial. Don't listen to her, Daniel would say later, kissing my forehead. You're perfect the way you are. But he never defended me to her face. Rachel was worse. Daniel's younger sister graduated from business school, already climbing the corporate ladder at their father's investment firm. She'd look at me like I was a stray dog Daniel had brought home out of pity. At family dinners, she'd talk about her promotions, her travels, her designer purchases, then turn to me with a smile sharp as glass. And, Olivia, how's the book stuff going? I'd smile and say it was going well, even when it wasn't, even when I'd spent another day filing manuscripts I'd never get to write. The breaking point came in spring. I'd been working on a novel for 2 years, stolen hours between work and taking care of Daniel. Literary fiction about a woman finding her identity after loss. I finally finished it, polished it until every sentence sang, and submitted it to my company's annual manuscript competition. First prize was publication and a $20,000 advance. I didn't tell Daniel. I wanted it to be a surprise. 3 weeks later, my editor called me into her office. She was smiling, but something about it felt wrong. Olivia, I need to talk to you about the competition. My heart raced. Did I win? Your manuscript was exceptional, truly. But we've decided to award first prize to another submission. She slid a folder across her desk. The writing is remarkably similar to yours in style and theme. We think you might want to see it. I opened the folder. The title page read, Reconstructed by Rachel Morrison. Rachel, Daniel's sister. My hand shook as I flipped through the pages. It was my novel. Not similar, identical, My words, my characters, my story with her name attached. "This is mine," I whispered. "I thought it might be, but she submitted it 2 weeks before you did. Do you have earlier drafts? Dated files?" I thought back. My laptop had crashed 6 months ago. Daniel borrowed Rachel's old computer for me while mine was being repaired. I'd written 3 chapters on it before my laptop came back. She'd copied everything, backdated her submission, stolen 2 years of my life. "I'll fix this," I said, standing. "I'll prove it's mine." My editor's expression turned pitying. "Rachel's father is Thomas Morrison. He's on our parent company's board, unless you have ironclad proof." The rest of her sentence didn't matter. I understood. I went home and confronted Daniel. "Your sister stole my manuscript." He was studying anatomy, highlighter in hand. He didn't even look up. "What are you talking about?" "My novel, the one I've been writing. She copied it from your old laptop and submitted it as her own. She's winning $20,000 and a book deal for my work." Finally, he looked at me. "Olivia, that's a serious accusation." "It's the truth. Rachel wouldn't do that. She's my sister. I'm your fiancé." He stood, and for a moment I thought he'd believe me, defend me, fix this. Instead, he sighed like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "You've been stressed. Maybe you're misremembering." "I'm not misremembering my own words. Or maybe you both had similar ideas. It happens. Rachel's been talking about writing a book for months." "Since she stole mine." His jaw tightened. "Stop. You're being paranoid and frankly kind of cruel. Rachel has worked hard for everything she has, just because you're jealous." "Jealous? Doesn't mean you get to accuse her of plagiarism. Drop it, Olivia. You're embarrassing yourself." That night, I slept on the couch. By morning, Daniel acted like nothing had happened. He kissed my forehead, said he'd be home late, left for his hospital rotation. I called Rachel. "Olivia, what a surprise!" Her voice dripped false sweetness. "I know what you did." Silence, then laughter, light and cruel. "I don't know what you mean." "My manuscript. You stole it." "Prove it." The sweetness vanished. "Oh, wait, you can't. Because I submitted it first. From my own laptop, with my own account. You really should be more careful with your work, Olivia, leaving it lying around like that." "Daniel will believe me." "Will he?" "Because I told him I was working on a novel months ago. I showed him outlines. You, on the other hand, never mentioned anything. So whose story sounds more believable?" My throat closed. "Here's some advice," Rachel continued. "Know your place. You're convenient for my brother right now, someone to cook and clean while he becomes something important. But you're not family. You're not one of us. And if you make trouble, we'll make you disappear." She hung up. I sat in our apartment, surrounded by Daniel's textbooks and my broken dreams, and realised I'd given everything to people who saw me as nothing. But I didn't know how to leave. I was trapped by love, by hope, by the sunk cost of 4 years and a ring on my finger. Then came the accident. Daniel's graduation was planned for June. Patricia insisted on throwing a party. Massive, expensive, invitation only. I spent weeks helping organise it while working full-time. Rachel's book, my book, had just been announced by the publisher. Her face was on promotional materials. Reporters called her a fresh voice in literary fiction. I swallowed the rage and kept planning Daniel's party. The night before graduation, Daniel came home at midnight. I was addressing the last batch of invitations, my hand cramping. "Still up?" He kissed the top of my head. "Almost done." He grabbed a beer from the fridge, loosened his tie. "Hey, I need to talk to you about something." My stomach dropped at his tone. "What?" "Rachel mentioned you called her a few weeks ago, said some pretty harsh things." I set down my pen. I told her I knew she stole my manuscript. Olivia? He sat across from me, and his expression was so tired, so disappointed. We talked about this. You need to let it go. She admitted it. On the phone, she laughed about it. She said you were aggressive and accusatory. Honestly, I'm worried about you. This obsession isn't healthy. It's not an obsession. It's theft. It's paranoia. He reached across the table, took my hand. His touch felt like a stranger's. My mum thinks maybe you should talk to someone. A therapist. This jealousy toward Rachel, the stress. I pulled my hand away. Your mother thinks I need therapy because your sister is a liar? Don't call her that. It's what she is. His eyes went cold. You know what? Maybe we need some space. This wedding, maybe we should postpone it. The words hit like ice water. What? Just until you get yourself together. Figure out what's going on with you. He stood, grabbed his keys. I'm going to stay at Rachel's tonight. We'll talk when you're calmer. He left. I sat alone in our apartment, surrounded by graduation party preparations for a man who chose his thief of a sister over me. And something inside me finally broke. Not with rage, with clarity. I grabbed my laptop and started documenting everything. Every conversation, every date, every piece of evidence I could compile. I backed it up in 3 places. Then I went to bed. Hollow, but determined. The next morning I woke early and drove to the graduation venue to help set up. Patricia was already there, directing caterers with military precision. She saw me and frowned. Olivia, I thought you might not come. Why wouldn't I? Daniel mentioned you've been difficult lately. I smiled. I am here to support him. She didn't look convinced, but there was too much to do for her to interrogate me. I spent the morning arranging flowers, setting up the gift table, making sure everything was perfect. Rachel arrived at noon, wearing designer sunglasses and a white dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She saw me and smirked. Still playing helpful girlfriend, I see. Congratulations on your book deal, I said evenly. She blinked, surprised by my calm. Thank you. It's been quite a journey. I'm sure. I adjusted a centerpiece. You must be so proud of all that hard work. Her smirk returned. I am. I walked away before I said something I'd regret. Daniel arrived an hour later in his cap and gown, surrounded by classmates. He saw me and smiled, genuine, warm, like the boy I'd fallen for years ago. You came. Of course. He pulled me aside. Listen, about last night. It's okay. Today's about you. He relaxed. I love you. You know that, right? I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I believed him anymore. The ceremony was beautiful. Daniel walked across the stage to thunderous applause. Patricia cried. Rachel filmed everything. I sat in the audience, clapping at the right moments, smiling when people looked at me and felt nothing. After graduation, we drove to the venue for the party. I rode with Daniel, his hand on my knee like everything was normal. The venue was perfect. String lights, champagne fountains, a jazz band playing softly. You did amazing, Daniel whispered. Thank you. For a moment, I almost forgot, almost fell back into the pattern of giving and accepting crumbs in return. But then I saw Rachel laughing with her publisher, holding a copy of my book with her name on it. And I remembered. The party lasted 4 hours. I smiled until my face hurt, made small talk, accepted congratulations for Daniel's success like it was mine too. Then, during the dinner service, Rachel stood to make a toast. To my brilliant brother, she began, glass raised, who's going to change the world, and to Olivia, who's been supportive. The pause before supportive was deliberate. A few people laughed. I felt the mockery like a slap. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table, apologizing without words. Not enough to defend me publicly, Never enough. After dinner, I excused myself to the bathroom, stood in front of the mirror, staring at a woman who'd forgotten who she was before she became Daniel's girlfriend, Daniel's helper, Daniel's accessory. I pulled out my phone and sent 3 emails, one to a literary lawyer, one to a journalist who covered publishing scandals, one to myself with every piece of evidence I'd compiled about Rachel's theft. Then I went back to the party. I never made it home. The crash happened on the highway. Daniel was driving, slightly drunk from celebration, arguing with me about whether we should stay at his mother's house or go home. I don't remember what I said. I remember headlights, the sound of metal, glass. Then nothing. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital room, machines beeping, Patricia and Rachel standing beside my bed, not Daniel. Where? My voice was a rasp. Patricia's face was a mask of grief. Olivia, honey, there was an accident. Daniel? Rachel looked away. Patricia gripped my hand. He didn't make it. The world stopped. They told me he died on impact, that I'd been in a coma, that his funeral was tomorrow. They spoke like I was fragile, like they cared, but their eyes held something else. Relief. I saw it in the way Rachel stood back, arms crossed, in the way Patricia's tears seemed performative. They wanted me gone, and now Daniel was gone instead, and I was an inconvenient witness to their family's perfection. The funeral, I whispered. I need to be there. Of course, Patricia said, but her tone said she wished I'd stay away. I was discharged the next morning against medical advice. My ribs were bruised, my arm in a sling, but I could walk. I wore black, went to the funeral, stood beside the coffin while people praised Daniel's kindness, his brilliance, his love for me. All lies, or half-truths. The kind that look like love from the outside, but feel like prison from within. Rachel gave her eulogy, talked about how devoted I was, how destroyed I must be. Every word was an act, a performance for the crowd. I stood silent and still, because 3 hours before the funeral, I'd woken in my hospital bed and remembered something impossible. I'd been here before. Not this exact moment, but this timeline, this sequence. Daniel dying in a crash, his funeral, Rachel's crocodile tears. And what came after? Me, alone and broken, blamed for being in the car, whispered about as the distraction that killed him, pushed out by his family, losing everything. And then dying myself 6 months later, lonely and forgotten in a studio apartment I could barely afford, having lost my job, my dreams, my will to live. I died at 26 with nothing and no one. But somehow I'd woken up again. Not in the hospital. Earlier. I opened my eyes and the ceiling was different. Wrong. Familiar. It was my college apartment, the one I'd shared with my roommate junior year. I scrambled out of bed, grabbed my phone. The date read September 15th, 5 years earlier. Impossible. But my hands were younger. My body didn't hurt. And when I looked in the mirror, I saw myself at 21, before Daniel, before the slow erosion of everything I was. I'd been given a second chance, and I remembered everything. The morning light through my college apartment window looked like a baptism. I sat on the edge of my bed, breathing slowly, taking inventory. 21 years old again. Autumn semester, junior year. In 3 weeks, I'd meet Daniel in the library. In 4 years, I'd lose everything. Unless I changed it. My roommate Harper knocked on my door. You alive in there? We've got psych in 20. Coming? I called, my voice strange and young in my own ears. I dressed in a daze, went to class, watched faces I'd forgotten, heard lectures I'd sat through once before. Everything felt both surreal and hyper-real, like a movie I was watching and starring in simultaneously. That night, I made a list. Things I knew would happen. Daniel's trajectory, medical school, graduation, the party, the crash. Rachel's theft, though it wouldn't occur for years. Patricia's subtle cruelty, every small cut and large betrayal, and things I could change. The next 3 weeks, I avoided the library, studied in coffee shops, took different routes across campus. When Daniel finally appeared, charming, persistent, everything I'd once found irresistible, I was in the campus bookstore, and I saw him coming. "Hey, you're in Professor Klein's biology class, right?" I looked at him. This man who would consume 4 years of my life and give nothing back, and felt nothing but distance. I missed last week's lecture. Could I borrow your notes?" In my first life, I'd said yes immediately. Offered to make copies, suggested coffee while we went over them. This time, I smiled politely. "Sorry, I share them with a study group. You should check with the TA." His confidence faltered. "Oh, sure, no problem." He walked away. I stood very still, watching him go, and felt the future shift. That should have been enough. One change, one butterfly effect, and maybe everything would be different. But I'd learned in death that prevention wasn't enough. I needed protection, proof, power. I spent the next 2 years deliberately, applied for internships at better publishing houses, built a portfolio, made connections, saved every penny. By graduation, I had a job offer in New York at a prestigious literary agency, a network of writers and editors who actually saw my potential, and a manuscript I'd written in stolen hours. My novel, but different, evolved better than before. I also had Rachel Morrison's future in a file, because I'd learned something useful in my first timeline. Rachel's plagiarism wasn't opportunistic. It was habitual. During a family dinner Daniel once dragged me to, she'd mentioned a brilliant marketing presentation that landed her a promotion. When I later heard one of her co-workers describe the exact same presentation she'd given months earlier, I understood. Rachel stole everything. She just hadn't been caught yet. So I watched, waited, collected evidence like pressing flowers, delicate work requiring patience. I never dated Daniel, barely spoke to him after that first meeting. Through mutual friends, I heard he dated someone else briefly, then another girl, then coasted through medical school single and focused. He became what he always wanted, successful, admired, untouched by complications like love. We were strangers. It was perfect. 3 years after my rebirth, Rachel published another book. Different title, different premise, but I recognised scenes from a manuscript that had circulated in publishing circles months earlier, written by an emerging author who died in a car accident. She'd stolen from the dead. I compiled everything, her patterns, the original sources, testimony from people she'd plagiarised. Then I sent it to the same journalist I'd emailed in my first life, the one who never got the chance to investigate because I died. This time, he had time. The exposé ran 6 months later. The serial plagiarist, Rachel Morrison's web of theft. It destroyed her. Book deals cancelled. Publishers sued her. Her father's company distanced themselves. She became a cautionary tale. And I was nowhere near it, just an assistant editor in New York who happened to know the journalist professionally. Clean hands, perfect distance. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow. Because revenge without witness is just consequences, and consequences without understanding are meaningless. Rachel didn't know she'd stolen from me. She probably didn't even remember my name. So, I arranged a meeting. The coffee shop was neutral territory, downtown Manhattan, far from both our worlds. I'd told Rachel's assistant I was a producer interested in her story for a podcast about literary scandals, redemption angle, sympathetic perspective. She came because she was desperate. I was already seated when she arrived. 5 years had passed since my rebirth. She looked different, harder, older, diminished. The confidence I'd seen in my first life was gone, replaced with something brittle. She didn't recognise me at first. "Rachel Morrison?" I stood, extended my hand. Thank you for meeting me. Of course. Her smile was practiced. Though I should warn you, I'm being very selective about media opportunities. I understand. Please, sit. We ordered coffee, made small talk. I let her relax, thinking she was in control. Then I said, I actually wanted to ask about your earlier work, before the controversy. Her jaw tightened. I've addressed those accusations multiple times? I'm sure, but I'm particularly interested in your first book. Reconstructed, the one about a woman finding identity after loss. Yes, that was mine. Was it? Silence. I pulled out a folder. Inside were printed pages, my original drafts with metadata showing dates, my email correspondence with early readers, workshop notes with my name. These are from 6 years ago, 2 years before you published your book. I slid them across the table. The protagonist's name, the opening scene, the climax, all identical. Rachel's face drained of colour. Where did you get these? I wrote them. My name is Olivia Chen. We met once, very briefly. I was dating your brother. Recognition flickered in her eyes. Daniel's girlfriend. You disappeared. I made different choices. But I remember you, Rachel. I remember exactly what you did. Her hands trembled around her coffee cup. That was years ago. I was young. I made mistakes. You stole 2 years of my life. Work I poured my heart into, and you laughed about it. I never know your place, I quoted. You're convenient. You're not family. You told me if I made trouble, you'd make me disappear. Remember? She stared at me like I was a ghost. Maybe I was. So, here's what happens now, I continued calmly. You're going to sign a confession. Admit that Reconstructed was plagiarized from me. Return any profits. Public apology. I've already lost everything. What more do you want? I want you to understand. I leaned forward. You took from me because you thought I was weak. Thought I'd never fight back. And in another life, you were right. But not this one. She was crying now, silent tears streaking makeup. Please, I can't take any more public scandal. It'll destroy what's left. You destroyed yourself. I'm just making sure the truth is recorded. I stood, left the confession papers on the table with a pen. Sign it or don't. Either way, your story is over. Mine is just beginning. I walked out of the coffee shop into afternoon sunlight, leaving Rachel Morrison alone with her choices. 4 years after my rebirth, my novel was published under my own name. Different from the one Rachel stole. Better, richer, earned through solitary work. It received modest success, enough to matter. I built a life carefully, made friends who saw me, not what I could provide, dated occasionally, but never lost myself in another person. Worked my way up to editor, then senior editor, then acquired my own authors. I became someone complete, and I avoided Daniel Morrison like a parallel timeline I'd escaped. Then came the invitation. Patricia Morrison requests the pleasure of your company at the wedding of her son, Dr. Daniel Morrison, to Miss Victoria Park. I stared at the cream cardstock, embossed lettering, formal and cold. Someone had found me, researched me, sent this deliberately, a test or a trap. At the bottom, in handwritten script, please come, I'd like to apologise. Patricia. I should have ignored it, should have continued my separate, healed life, but I was curious. The wedding was upstate, a full ceremony in a historic estate. I wore navy blue, elegant and understated. Drove up alone, parked among Mercedes and BMWs, walked into a world I'd once almost belonged to. Patricia found me during cocktail hour. She'd aged, grey in her hair, lines around her mouth. She looked at me like I was an artefact from another era. Olivia, you came. Your note was intriguing. She led me to a quiet corner away from the crowd. I heard about your book, your success. I'm glad. Are you? She flinched. I know I wasn't kind to you. When you were with Daniel, I thought you weren't good enough for him. I was wrong. Why tell me now? Because Rachel's scandal made me look at my family differently, made me question how we treated people. You were always so quiet, so accommodating. I mistook that for weakness. She paused. I'm sorry. It was probably the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. Thank you, I said, and meant it. There's something else. Patricia glanced toward the ceremony space. Daniel doesn't know you're here. He barely remembers you, honestly. But I wanted you to see him happy, to know that everything worked out. Did it? Something passed across her face. Doubt, maybe, or recognition that worked out was subjective. The ceremony began. I sat in the back, watching Daniel marry a woman who looked competent and polished. Victoria Park, cardiac surgeon, daughter of hospital administrators. The perfect match. They looked happy. Or they looked like they fit, which people often mistake for the same thing. During the reception, Daniel saw me, did a double take, crossed the room with his new wife on his arm. Olivia, wow, I haven't seen you in, 6 years? 7. You look great. What are you doing now? I'm an editor. I also write. That's amazing. He seemed genuinely pleased, like an old friend catching up. I always thought you'd do something creative. This is Victoria, my wife. We shook hands, made polite conversation. Daniel talked about his residency, his work at a prestigious hospital. Victoria mentioned they were thinking about buying a house. Normal, successful, content. And I felt nothing. No longing, no regret, not even the satisfaction of him seeing what he'd missed. Just distance, clean and complete. It was good seeing you, I said, and walked away. I left the reception early, drove back to the city under stars, and realised I'd finally let go. Rachel's confession was published 2 weeks after Daniel's wedding. Quiet, in an industry newsletter, easy to miss unless you were looking. She admitted to plagiarising Reconstructed from my earlier work, issued a formal apology, donated her profits to a literary foundation for emerging writers. It was barely news. Her scandal was old, her name already ruined. But it mattered to me, proof, acknowledgement, the record corrected. I framed the confession and hung it in my office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. I existed. My work mattered. The truth persisted. Life continued. I edited books that changed people, mentored young writers who reminded me of myself, published 2 more novels, each better than the last. Sometimes I thought about my first life, the crash, the funeral, the slow death afterward, how close I came to disappearing entirely. And I thought about Daniel, dying in that accident while I survived, and what happened after. Because I remembered. In my first life, after Daniel's funeral, I lived 6 more months. His family blamed me subtly for the crash. She distracted him. They were arguing. The whispers followed me everywhere. I lost my job, not fired, but restructured out, couldn't afford our apartment, moved into a studio in a bad neighbourhood, stopped writing, stopped eating regularly, stopped seeing the point. Rachel's book was being adapted into a film. She was everywhere. Interviews, events, success built on my stolen work. And I was nowhere. The night I died, I remember sitting on the floor of my studio, staring at an empty bottle of sleeping pills, thinking about how easy it would be to just stop. I didn't plan it. It just happened. Like I'd slowly erased myself until there was nothing left. They found me 3 days later. No funeral, no mourners, just a body disposed of quietly, forgotten immediately. That was the life I'd left behind. Now, 8 years after my rebirth, I stood in a cemetery. Daniel's cemetery, his family plot, where they'd buried him in my first timeline. Only in this timeline, Daniel wasn't dead. He was alive, married, successful, living the life he'd always wanted, and the grave I was visiting was empty, or rather, it held someone else. I knelt beside the headstone, placed a small urn on the grass. Inside were ashes. Not human, pig ashes to be precise. Cremated remains from a restaurant's whole hog roast, collected carefully, mixed with soil and rose petals. Symbolic, meaningless, a private joke between me and the universe. Because in my first life, this grave would have been Daniel's, and I would have stood here destroyed, mourning a man who never truly loved me. But I'd changed everything. I'd removed myself from his story, lived separately, healed, thrived, and he'd lived too, married someone else, never crashed, never needed mourning. The grave was empty because the death never happened. So I filled it with pig's ashes, a mockery of the tragedy that didn't occur, a memorial to a timeline that no longer existed, a middle finger to fate itself. I sat beside the empty grave and watched the sunset. Somewhere across town, Daniel was having dinner with Victoria, planning their future, oblivious to the parallel life where he'd died and taken me down with him. Somewhere in the city, Rachel was living small and quiet, her name tainted, her career over, and I was here, free and whole, mourning nothing. I didn't destroy them, I whispered to the empty grave. I outgrew them. The evening air smelled like autumn, leaves and earth and endings that were also beginnings. I stood, dusted off my jeans, and walked away from the cemetery. Behind me, the urn of pig's ashes sat on the empty grave like a joke, only I understood. Ahead of me, the city lights flickered on, and my life, the one I'd built with my own hands, my own choices, my own strength, waited. I got in my car and drove toward it. The cemetery faded in my rearview mirror and I smiled. My victory was never revenge. It was becoming untouchable. And I was free.